Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the November 6th, 2019 City of Murfreesboro Planning Commission meeting. We'll call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum present tonight, full house. First item we need to attend to is to approve the minutes of the September 18th, 2019 and October 2nd, 2019 Planning Commission meeting minutes. So, were there any additions, corrections to any of those minutes? There are none. We will approve those as submitted. Our we had one item of old business, and that has been withdrawn. So we will move on to our new business. First item in new business is the zoning application for approximately 23 acres located along Veterans Parkway to be rezoned from RS10 to PRD, Veterans Cove PRD. Alcorn Properties LLC is the applicant. Ms. Rush, good evening.
Good evening, Planning Commission. The subject property is located along the north side of Veterans Parkway, west of Greenview Drive. It's approximately 23 acres in size, and the applicant, Alcorn Properties LLC, is requesting to rezone the property from single-family residential, RS10, which is a 10,000 lot minimum parcel size, to planned residential development to allow for development of 95 single-family attached dwelling units. This would be at a density of 4.17 dwelling units to the acre. The adjacent zoning within the city to the north is RS10, which is also it's single-family residential, and to the east is a planned unit development for single-family residential with a couple of commercial buildings that would have been fronting along Veterans Parkway called Cottages at Snell Cove. The properties to the west, south, and east are all in the unincorporated portion of Rutherford County and are developed primarily with single-family residences. The purpose of the rezoning is to create the Veterans Cove PRD, and it would consist of 22 buildings with 3 to 5 units per building. The development would be established with a horizontal property regime, so the units would be sold individually, and an HOA would maintain all the common areas. The buildings are primarily 1 or 2 story units between 1,600 square feet up to 2,500 square feet in size. Each of the units would be at least 2 bedrooms. They would all have 2-car garages, and the garages would have windowed garage doors with exteriors to match the primary building. Each of the units would have a covered front porch or a stoop, which is a nice amenity. They would also have an option for a covered back porch or sunroom. The materials for the building would be either brick, stone, and hardy board combination. There would be some vinyl in the overhangs and soffits, but primarily it is the masonry products. The setbacks are proposed to be 25 feet from the rights-of-way. All the roads in this development would be public roads, so they would be 25 feet back, and then 20 feet from the other property lines. And the units that are adjacent to Veterans Parkway would be 45 feet setback. The open space is about 58% of the property. There is a lot of open space areas because there are a lot of need for detention. There is a seasonal creek that's there, and the applicant can explain a little bit more detail about the drainage of the site. But the open space is pretty significant. Amenities that are proposed is a pavilion, dog park, trails with benches, and these are dispersed throughout the project site. The developer did conduct a neighborhood meeting back on August 12th. There were neighbors that attended, and predominantly the comments that were being made by the neighborhood were concerns with drainage and possible flooding. So the engineer will address those in his presentation. The one thing I did want to bring to your attention is the 2035 Murfreesboro Comprehensive Plan. The future land use map for this site is suburban residential. And suburban residential is a lower density residential development type. It does help with the transition between the rural areas and a more suburban area. And they often, they can include smaller lots with more greater open spaces, which this is consistent with. but the density for this land use is 3.54, and the proposed density from the development is 4.17. So this is an increase from the 2035 in terms of density. In terms of the characteristics, everything else I think is pretty compatible. The difference between that and number of units, if you were to do the calculations, would be this proposed is 95. The lower density that would be consistent with the 2035 plan would be 81. So it's a difference of 14 units would be less. The action for the Planning Commission that we're requesting tonight would be to discuss this amendment and conduct a public hearing, after which you discuss the matter. You can please formulate a recommendation to our City Council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rush. Do we have any questions? Sorry, any questions for Ms. Rush or the developer before we open the public hearing? Are we going to have a like a presentation? Great.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nathan Melson. I work with the Civil Infrastructure Associates. We are representing the developer, Alcorn Properties. We are the civil engineer on the project. And just to add on to what Ms. Rush has already stated, this property is located on Veterans Parkway. The property will, of course, have 95 attached dwelling units. There will be four locations or connections to existing road, or 4 connections for ingress and egress. One will be located, the primary residence will be located on Veterans Parkway. All right. The secondary access will be located with Suzanne Drive, and they'll be, once the development has been fully constructed, those are easily accessible. There is a northern access route which will go through the Riversdown Annex Section 2 development, which then has connection to Barfield Road. And then with a 4th potential connection, which would be West Ridge Drive, which would connect to the Parkwood subdivision, and then can be accessed to Veterans Parkway. As you can tell from our concept plan, there's adequate spaces, two spaces in each unit in the garage, with space for 2 spaces in the driveway, so essentially 4 spaces per unit. There's also 27 additional guest parking spaces throughout the development. Amenities will include a pavilion near the primary entrance, which would also include the mail kiosk location for mail delivery for the entire development, a dog park located in the southeast corner of the property for the residents, and as well as local walking trails that connect the sidewalks within right-of-way to various areas in the development. So it creates a continuous walking path. If the Planning Commission has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you. We may have more after the public hearing. All right, we will have our first public hearing tonight, and if you're here to speak on this matter, we'll ask you to come forward to the podium, state your name and your address. You will have 3 minutes to speak, and please make all your comments to the Planning Commission. If you have questions, we'll make note of those, and then we will answer all of the questions at the end of the public hearing. So with that, we will open this first public hearing and ask anybody to come forward that would like to speak on this item. No one? Okay. We will close this public hearing and ask for comments and questions from the Planning Commission.
Matthew, if this property were being developed without the PRD, would it be, what density would it be zoned at?
Well, it's currently zoned RS10, so minimum 10,000 square foot lots. It's difficult to say exactly how many lots that you could get with the existing zoning because of the environmental limitations on it. But if I had to guess, I'd say probably 40 to 50 lots, maybe. If that, I'll look at Mr. Melson to see if perhaps he's taking a look at that.
It's approximately.
Mr. Melson, if you wouldn't mind going up to the.
My apologies. Yes, it'd be approximately about 55 to 60 is what we looked at it previously. With the stream running through the site, which we did have it a hydrologic determination that reduces it. We were able to get about a little over 65 before we had that determination done.
But if it didn't have the limitations, what would we get on an acre with an RS10?
Generally, you'd look at about slightly over 3 dwelling units once you factor in the right-of-way for RS10. So at 22 acres, I'd say you'd probably be looking at 65 to 70 lots max in the RS10 zoning district in a perfect world.
Okay. So the 4.17 is really not that much more if it were perfect conditions, even though it's not. I mean, it's about 1 unit per acre additional, looking at the total property.
That's correct, and it's about, as Ms. Rush mentioned, just a little over half a unit over what our comprehensive plan recommends.
Any other comments or questions?
If there are none, I'll make a motion to approve, subject to all staff comments.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Next item tonight is a proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance regarding Section 24, Overlay District Regulations, Article 6, CCO, the City Core Overlay District. Pertaining to the CCO zoning district, the City of Murfreesboro Planning Department is the applicant. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our next public hearing tonight is with regards to the City Core Overlay District zoning ordinance amendment. And I'm sorry for my voice, I've got a little bit of a cold, so I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. But to give you a little bit of history on this, the City Core Overlay District was originally adopted in 2013, and it was kind of a test run at the time. It was an area that was smaller than what we thought could be in our City Core Overlay District, but we really wanted to kind of test it out and see how it worked on a smaller area. So the area that was adopted as the City Core Overlay District 6 years ago was the area in between, really in between Mercury and East Main Street, and kind of bounded on its west side by the downtown, and on the east side by Middle Tennessee Boulevard. And so I think what we found in applying the City Core Overlay District over the last 6 years is that there have been some infill residential developments that have benefited from the City Core Overlay District. There have been a number of single-family homes where we have where rebuilds have been easier, and we think have been more in keeping with the existing development because they've been allowed to build closer to the street. They've had relaxed parking requirements because of the nature of downtown urban living, and so we think some aspects of the City Core Overlay District have been very beneficial. There were a number of commercial uses that were made allowable by special use permit in the residential zoning districts. We really have not seen the application of those parts of this existing City Core Overlay District, which we really meant that to spur some neighborhood commercial uses, and that just hasn't happened. So what we, in 2016 and 2017, we undertook the North Highland Avenue planning study and the Historic Bottoms planning study to kind of look at how we plan for for infill development downtown and for redevelopment downtown. And what we thought, just like when we adopted the original City Core Overlay District in 2013, that the very suburban style zoning regulations, if you will, that were in place prior to the adoption of the original City Core Overlay District just really don't fit development from 100 years ago. And so we really wanted to look and see what our vision for the community was. And so we had steering committees for both the Historic Bottoms study and the North Highland study, several opportunities for public input during that process. And what came out of that were visions for those areas, and eventually the plans that were put forth by our consultant Reagan Smith and staff and the steering committees, and brought to the Planning Commission for review and approval. And Planning Commission in April 2017 adopted those two planning studies as guiding documents. So we looked to those for inspiration and for the vision, the tone that it set for future development and redevelopment in that area. And so Mr. Anthony, our former director, spent a lot of time on crafting regulations for our downtown, including expanding the boundaries of our downtown to include both of the areas that were involved in those planning studies. Well, we had a public hearing for the zoning ordinance amendment, I believe in April. It passed Planning Commission, but the map amendment to expand the boundaries of the City Core Overlay District trailed behind, and the map amendment was what triggered the mail-outs that went out to everybody, and that's when I think people really started taking note of the ordinance amendment as well. And in July, we had a public hearing on the map amendment where there were many parts of the ordinance amendment that actually concerned people. So the Planning Commission at that meeting deferred the map amendment, and staff, Mr. Anthony specifically, took it upon himself to go back to the drawing board and really make the ordinance amendment less complicated, much more simple. As you recall, in the original draft from back in the winter and spring, there were, I think, 11 sub-districts. Each sub-district had its own set of regulations. And so first you had to identify what sub-district you were located in, then what were the specific regulations for that sub-district. And so it was just a lot for people to take in. All in all, I think it was about 50 to 55 pages worth of regulations. Mr. Anthony went back to the drawing board, got rid of the sub-districts, crafted regulations that were more about development form rather than use, and was able to cull that down to about 11 pages. Since then, about a week ago, I went back through, found some things that I really thought were important to add for your consideration. Now, certainly, that's just a proposal, the additional changes that we sent to you last week. So what I really wanted to do was just to go through those changes that staff is recommending that you consider. Back in 2013, in our existing regulations, there was a list of prohibited uses that was included. So in the original version that went to y'all, that y'all recommended for approval in the springtime, that list of prohibited uses updated for current terminology and kind of modifying some of the uses was included. Mr. Anthony took that list out in the version that he came up with most recently. Well, my train of thought was that if those uses were seen as being incompatible with the future development of the property in 2013, then there was likely some merit to that. And so looked at that list of uses, modified it a little bit and put it back in there. Certainly, I'm happy to look forward to hearing your thoughts on that. The other thing was that in the latest version, there was no provisions for non-conforming uses. So there was, one of the things that we've made a point of is stating that structures that are non-conforming, and when you think of non-conforming structures, those are structures that don't meet our bulk regulations. In other words, our setbacks, our lot coverage, things like that. And so if you have a structure that will be made non-conforming by the new CCO regulations, then we have a provision in there for a one-time complete rebuild. So if there was damage or destruction, or if the owner just wanted to scrape and replace, they could build back the structure in its same footprint one time by right. So got to thinking, in 2013, we put a provision in there that made certain residential uses in the commercial highway zone allowed by right. And the primary reason was because there were a number of single-family residences in the South Manny Avenue area that were zoned commercial highway that were non-conforming prior to 2013. People were having issues getting their refinancing approved. Many of those homes were owner-occupied, and that was a commitment that was made in 2013 to make those structures, to give those structures some protection. And so we put a clause in the ordinance, in the proposed ordinance before you, that states that structures that are devoted to legally established non-conforming uses, whether non-conforming per the CCO or non-conforming per the existing base zoning regulations, would also be extended that one-time rebuild provision, so that, for example, if there is a single-family home that's in the commercial highway zone that's not permitted under the base zoning, then they would be allowed that one-time provision to rebuild. And so really was something that was important to me to include in there, because that was a point that was made in 2013 was to ease the burden on the people who owned homes in that area that were non-conforming. There are a couple of other miscellaneous housekeeping amendments in there, but that's the crux of the changes from the day meeting, the draft that you saw at the day meeting, and what you have before you tonight. But overall, as I've stated, these regulations are to help spur development and redevelopment, not hinder development or redevelopment. They're regulations that attempt to grant more flexibility than the existing regulations have with respect to setbacks, lot coverage, and other site design issues, where the existing suburban zoning regulations are really not a good fit for development downtown. So I'll be happy to answer any other questions before or after the public hearing. This first public hearing will just be on the zoning ordinance amendment, and then we'll have a separate public hearing on the map amendment.
Okay, questions for Mr. Blomley before we open the public hearing? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. We'll go ahead and open the public hearing for this item and ask anybody that would like to speak to please come forward to the microphone. Thank you. And please state your name and address. I'm going to do my little 3 minutes up here, so
Yes, ma'am.
thank you.
My name is Mark Highland. I live at 721 North Spring Street. My wife and I have occupied that residence for 35 years, so I have a very strong interest in the downtown area. I love living in this part of the city. To me, it is Murfreesboro, much more so than anything that's been developed in the last 20 years. This is Murfreesboro. So specifically to what Mr. Bromley has said, and I agree with, in principle, with what he's saying. However, I question, in the frequently asked questions, The first question addresses the purpose of the city core overlay. And my question specifically is, I understand the purpose, but what is the necessity? Why do we need this done? Especially on the prohibitions. One of the first prohibitions would prohibit an airport use. Does the current zoning not prohibit an airport being put in the middle of downtown? I can't believe that sounds ridiculous. I can't believe it would not. Also, further in the text, one of the prohibitions would be for a sheet metal shop. Well, in the downtown district, we have mechanics and gas stations, we have machine shops, we have Bratton Brothers that builds fencing on Vine Street. Would an organization like Roscoe Brown building heat and air ducts for your home really be incompatible in this area? I would think not. So those were two specific things. I just don't, I'm trying to understand why we need the prohibitions. The second point I wanted to make very quickly was on the reconstruction provision, a one-time provision that you could rebuild, essentially the same, in the same footprint on the same lot. When there was another proposal here, and I don't know if it was the 2013 or prior, where there was another core overlay project done for this area. And the question I had at that time was, I do not understand why the city does not have an overriding regulation that simply allows everyone to sleep at night knowing that no matter how many times your home would be destroyed by fire or tornado or any other natural disaster, why you wouldn't be allowed to rebuild essentially the same home or business on the same lot as it is. This neighborhood affords us home, single residence families, high rises that are brick. We have a double wide with aluminum siding. We have just a wide variety of churches and schools and virtually anything that you could possibly ever need within your fingertip reach. I have no need to go to any of the new areas. Out on Medical Center, I don't even hardly participate at the mall in any of those businesses because what I have is right here. It's all right here. The churches, the government center, we're in the overlay district right now. Everything you need, the dry cleaners, the police station, everything is here. I just want to be assured that there will be no changes to this wonderful neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next? Nobody else? Okay. Close the public hearing. Sorry about that. And we will ask Mr. Blomley to address a few of those questions. Thank you.
I'd be glad to. Thank you, Ms. Jones. Mr. Highland's property at 721 North Spring Street is not currently in the City Core Overlay District, as that would be north of East Main Street. But under the proposal, it would be located in the City Core Overlay District. Why do we need the prohibitions? I think that it depends on, and of course that's not up to me. That's up to you and the City Council. I think we're setting the vision for how we want the City Core to develop, and this list of uses before you is just an example of what it could be. If there are some in there that you want to remove from that list, I think that's fine, or that obviously that would be fine with me. If you want to remove the whole list, that would be fine with me. But I thought it was important because in 2013, it was important to the Planning Commission and City Council to prohibit certain uses. So I thought that really it would be something that I would need to do to bring that before you to see if having a list like that would be something that you feel should be carried over to the new regulations. As far as why nonconformities are not allowed to be rebuilt by right, it's routine that in zoning ordinances all over, there's a threshold after which non-conforming structures cannot be built. In our zoning ordinance, it's once that non-conforming structure is damaged or destroyed beyond 75% of its value, then it must be built back to what the zoning allows. So it's really unprecedented, at least in our regulations, to allow a one-time rebuild at all. And to, so it's really something that we're putting in there to try to accommodate those structures that may be made non-conforming. The goal of the non-conforming regulations in a zoning ordinance, by saying that once it's destroyed beyond 75%, is to get the property to conform. And so by us saying that you can rebuild once, we're basically pushing aside for one time the regulation that applies all over the rest of the city that says if it's destroyed beyond 75%, you must rebuild back to the current requirements. Those were the concerns that I heard him state. If I missed one, just let me know.
Do you have that list of, I happen to print that out and bring it with me since I don't have a screen here. Do you have those uses that you could put on the screen for the
Sure.
commission members to see the, so they can have it in front of them, what we're talking about?
And many of these, like airport and heliport, I think that was in the previous version. I agree with him. The likelihood of there being an airport downtown is pretty slim.
Heliport might be.
Heliport, possibly, yes.
Could happen.
And that may have been the thought process.
But it's a pretty common practice when we do a PRD or any type of development that we have restricted uses, whether it's a foundry or a adult store or something like that. And that's for the neighborhood's protection. I mean, there's, a fireworks retailer, a drive-in theater, a greenhouse or a nursery or some of the things on there. But are we, I think we don't have anything on here that's so far outlandish that you wouldn't say that's completely inappropriate for the downtown area, do we? I mean,
Perhaps like animal or poultry slaughter, stockyards or rendering. But, we do have some industrial zones. The Historic Bottoms area is primarily a heavy industrial zoning district. And so, kind of looking at it big picture and saying, trying to think about what the vision for the Historic Bottoms area is, and if we do want to prohibit uses, I think the thought process behind the Historic Bottoms area was that area was ripe for redevelopment. A lot of 50s and 60s era industrial type buildings that were getting close to the end of their lifespan, and with the existing heavy industrial zoning, it's very, very permissive in what it allows. I would mention that, I'm sorry, Mr. Smotherman.
I was going to say, well, there's probably things that would be non-conforming today that with the overlay would become conforming because of perhaps something is too large a footprint to technically be on the lot where it's at today. Because of the change in the square footage that you can develop on the property or the percentage of the property that can develop, there's opportunities now that it could actually make it conforming so that you could build it back as many times as you wanted to under its current footprint, even though it would be today you wouldn't be able to do that, because if it were to be destroyed today, you would be non-conforming, so you wouldn't be able to come back and do that.
Yes, sir. This would certainly give more flexibility, whether it's for with regards to existing structures, much more flexibility than the existing base zoning would allow. And I would mention, as far as this use list, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there are several existing uses on this list that are in the, within the boundaries of the proposed CCO, including several motor vehicle sales lots and a liquor store that come to mind. So those would be made non-conforming uses, but the clause about non-conforming uses means that structures housing non-conforming uses would be allowed to be rebuilt one time by right.
But it would restrict any new.
That's correct. I think the primary purpose of that would be to restrict any new such uses that are on this list from going downtown.
Well, I agree that there are several things on this list that I don't think are the things that we would want to see in those areas. And specifically, like you mentioned, the Bottoms area, a lot of these things that could come in and by right now could go into that area. These few things that have been listed in here as restrictions in the industrial areas would keep them from coming into the Bottoms area. And same thing with several of these other commercial areas. Again, nothing wrong with them, but I don't think they're the right thing for the downtown area. So I think it's, you know, I think we need the restrictions. I like the idea of having the restrictions in there for some of these things. I'm sure, you know, you could look at every one of them individually and say yay or nay to any of them, but overall, I think it's good to have some of them.
As far as property value is concerned, as a general rule, everybody, when the Gateway was first being talked about, everybody was kind of like, nobody's going to buy there or build there because the restrictions are so restrictive. It had the exact opposite effect because everybody knew what their neighbor could do, so you didn't have to worry about these things coming in next door to you that you might be opposed to. So it actually gives you some protection that your neighborhood will either stay the way it is or potentially improve versus, just being ad hoc with it and allowing it to develop as it would just like to, I guess.
Other comments and questions from the Planning Commission?
Can you show the rest of the other section?
I'm sorry, Mr. Russell?
Can you show the other section?
Second page.
I know there's only one thing on here that's referred to as seasonal, and if somebody had a fireworks stand in the past, would they be allowed to have it one more time?
The only one that I can think of that's in the boundaries of the CCO is at the corner of Broad and Church, and the city now owns that property. So there was one a long time ago at the corner of Broad and Mercury, but I think it's lost any kind of grandfathering rights that it would have.
Are those not looked at as separately based on a temporary?
They are required to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and they would each have a separate public hearing. But if this is adopted with that as a prohibited use, that would not be an option for them.
Okay.
There's no other questions or comments. I'm going to move for approval as presented.
Got a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you very much, and Mr. Blomley and all the staff, thanks so much for all that hard work on that. That's gone on for a long time. Very good. Our next item is the zoning application for 2,348 lots, or approximately 920 acres, as shown on the accompanying map to be zoned City Core Overlay, CCO, City of Murfreesboro Planning Department applicant. Mr. Blomley.
It would have made the heading much too long to put all the streets in there, so we just put on the accompanying map.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We did that for you, Chairman Jones. The map is up on the screen, if we could get that put up. I know it's difficult to read on that big screen, but really what it does, it encompasses the existing City Core Overlay District, the areas in the Historic Bottoms Planning Study, and the North Highland Avenue Planning Study. So it pays homage to those two planning studies and the efforts that were put into those studies, and the importance given to the areas included in those study areas. But it also includes an area north of the downtown, as you head north on Walnut and Maple and Church and Spring, that have seen interest in redevelopment and infill development in recent years. And so in addition to Historic Bottoms, North Highland, and the existing CCO, that area is included in the proposed CCO as well, because I think we've seen 2 or 3 planned developments just within the last year or two within that area for redevelopment and infill development. And so I think what will happen is in that area, as well as a good bit of the rest of the City Core Overlay District, we'll continue to see planned developments on a parcel by parcel basis. And so getting these regulations in place and then expanding the boundaries of the City Core Overlay District will allow some of these uses to be by right to where, and some of these structures to be by right where they don't have to go through the rezoning process. Mr. Halliburton, you know this, our Board of Zoning Appeals now is taking a much tougher stance, really a more by-the-book stance on variance requests. So whereas in years past, we would see, if someone wanted to submit a variance request to bring their house in line with the houses on either side of it, we'd say, we'll just go to the Board of Zoning Appeals and apply for a setback variance. We don't do that anymore. And so really when you have wholesale variance requests, when you have variance requests that are repetitive, that show that they then show that there's a need for an ordinance amendment. And so an example of that was a couple of months ago, before our Board of Zoning Appeals, there was a request for an increase in lot coverage for a single-family home build on East College Street. I think all the Board of Zoning Appeals members agreed that the house looked great. In fact, it's since gone to the Historic Zoning Commission with a smaller footprint, and the preliminary elevations were endorsed by the Historic Zoning Commission. But the Board of Zoning Appeals said, we wish we could grant this variance, but there's just no hardship. It's self-created. There's nothing about this lot that's different than the lots around it. So I believe it was Mr. Tips that said it would be great if we had an ordinance amendment that would give people relief from this by right. And so this is an example of where there was desirable development that was prohibited by our current more suburban regulations. Under the proposed ordinance amendment, that the house that was proposed would be allowed by right because it would be under the threshold of the new increased maximum lot coverage. So what we're trying to do by expanding the boundaries of the City Core Overlay District is kind of include the areas that we expect there to be infill development and redevelopment, where we've seen a need by variances and by just meeting with people over the years who want to develop in the downtown area and have been met by roadblocks in the form of our regulations. And so this will help ease some of those roadblocks, and also in the areas that are depicted on this map, and also but while putting in some common sense requirements that would be consistent with the existing development patterns around it. So we have this map for you for your consideration for the expanded boundaries of the City Core Overlay District. We went ahead and included in the advertisement the existing City Core Overlay District. So while technically they're already in, those property owners are already in the City Core Overlay District, we wanted to make sure that we got the notices out to them. So we went ahead and included the entire boundaries of the City Core Overlay District, so that notices would go to everybody whose property is in the City Core, or is proposed to be in the City Core Overlay District. I think we ended up sending out about 1,700 or 1,800 letters in the process. But I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing on this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions before we open the public hearing? Okay, we'll open the public hearing on the map for the City Core Overlay and ask anybody to come forward that would like to speak. Anybody? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Any further questions for Mr. Blomley regarding the map? If not, we're ready for a motion. Or some coffee or something.
I think, well, first, before we even make the motion, I'm going to go ahead and compliment the planning department on what a good job that the planning department and especially Donald Anthony did on this. It was handled very well. It was done with neighborhood meetings that were held in this actual room here. And I think he did a really good job of simplifying it, and not only simplifying it, but getting it down to an understandable and a explainable format, so that it was much less scary than it was the first time it came forward. So I really won't think you guys deserve recognition for the fine job you did in this. And having said all that, I'll move for approval.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you very much. And ditto to all of Mr. Smotherman's comments. Great job.
Thank you.
Our next item is an annexation plan of services and annexation petition for approximately 65 acres located along Northwest Broad Street, Springboard Landing, Inc., and Mary Hord Haymore Children, LP applicants. And Ms. Green is out celebrating a birthday tonight, so she's not here with us. So, Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Ms. Jones, and if she's watching, which I doubt that she is, we'll wish Ms. Green a happy birthday. For her sake, I hope she's not. So. Our next item, and I'll try to do these items justice that she put so much hard work into. Our next item is an annexation study on and plan of services for property along Northwest Broad Street. It's just to the east of North Star Drive and the North Star Drive Industrial Park. It's portions of two parcels that are currently vacant. The frontage of these parcels was actually annexed into the city limits in the early 90s, I believe, when for whatever reason, I'm not sure, we annexed the first 200 feet of these property, 200 to 250 feet of these properties. But now the D.R. Horton Incorporated has a contract on both of these two parcels and a simultaneous zoning request on the two parcels with this annexation petition. All in all, the total annexation area is approximately 65 acres between the portions of the two parcels. The parcels are mostly undeveloped agricultural land, and I'll show you the aerial photo. As you can see, it is, the property is adjacent to both Overall Creek and the Stones River, and is within the city's urban growth boundary. The plan of services in the agenda packet that you have indicates that this property will be relatively easy to annex. Most services are already present, as the North Star Industrial Park directly adjacent to the property is already in the city limits. I will mention that one of the only hiccups in the plan of services, if I could call it that, is that MED currently does not have the capacity to serve the entire property. However, with additional infrastructure improvements at the expense of the developer during the course of development of this property, the entire property could be adequately served by MED. Sewer is currently available to the subject property at its southeast corner. I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing on the annexation and the plan of services. We'll have a separate public hearing regarding the zoning and a separate presentation on the zoning.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Is there a presentation from the developer for the annexation part? Okay.
No, ma'am, I don't believe so.
All right. So any questions before we open the public hearing? All right, so we will open the public hearing on this item and ask anybody to come forward that would like to speak regarding the annexation plan of services and annexation petition. Again, zoning will be in the next item.
Good evening. I'm Nicole Barnes. I'm the Director of Operations for a company by the name of Journey Pure. I think our property borders this. We're off of Florence Road. From the looks of the letter we received, I'm representing the property owner, and while we don't oppose any of it, we would just like to get some language around a buffer. We're a privately owned medical facility, and the property line is going to be visual if you develop it from our medical facility, so our patients will be easily seen, so forth and so on. So we're just thinking about some language around a natural buffer, 50 feet or so from that property line, so that we could be protected from, I think we're zoned, I was told we were zoned institution.
Okay.
So I just wanted to get that language out, if I could, please.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Barnes. Anybody else? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. And comments, questions from the Planning Commission regarding the annexation?
Do we want to address what the existing buffer is that's called for as part of this PRD?
Mr. Halliburton, if we could defer that until
Okay.
until the zoning, I think that'd be
Okay.
appropriate.
So we're going to answer your question in the next part.
In the zoning?
Yeah.
We talk about the zoning in the next,
No,
No.
today, the next
the
day.
very next public hearing.
With that, I'll make a motion that we approve the annexation and plan of services, subject to all staff comments.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Mr. Smotherman? All right, so motion passes. Our next item will be the zoning application for approximately 65 acres located along Northwest Broad Street to be zoned PUD simultaneous with annexation, and approximately 13 acres to be rezoned from RS-15 and light industrial to PUD. D.R. Horton is the applicant. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The companion zoning request is to rezone the 65 acres that we considered for annexation just a moment ago, as well as 13 acres along the frontage, the aforementioned 200 to 250 feet that was already in the city limits, to PUD simultaneous with annexation. the area along Northwest Broad Street, the subject property that's already in the city limits, a portion of it's zoned light industrial and a portion of it is zoned RS15. Just to the northwest of the subject property is the North Star Industrial Park, as I mentioned earlier, which is zoned light industrial. Directly across the street is Singer Road and light industrial zoning also. So the majority of the zoning in the immediate vicinity that's in the city limits is zoned light industrial. And as our speaker in our last public hearing indicated, there is a property located in the county, the Journey Pure facility, which is located directly to the north of the subject property. So if I was up at the podium, I would use the telestrator to show you where that was. And the Roselawn Cemetery and Funeral Home is the area where the RS15 label is, directly to the west of the subject property. The PUD is a combination of commercial, single-family attached, and single-family detached. There's a total density in the residential portion of the development of 5.28 dwelling units per acre. The 2035 comprehensive plan shows this area as urban commercial mixed use. And so the urban commercial mixed use designation allows for a maximum density of 60, that's 60 dwelling units per acre. And while both commercial and residential uses and high-density residential uses are envisioned for the urban commercial mixed-use land use character, that's it's staff's opinion that that designation was more for a true mixed-use development, kind of an urban mixed-use development, and that while some of the uses that are proposed would be permissible in the recommended land use character, the form of this development probably is not consistent with the vision that was in the 2035 land use plan for the property. With that being said, the applicant has requested this zoning request, and it's been before the Planning Commission for several work sessions. There were a number of changes that have been made throughout the process based on the feedback of staff and the feedback of the Planning Commission, and I'd like to go over a few of those real quick. Ms. Green bullet pointed those in her staff comments. So one of the concerns was having the townhomes directly on Northwest Broad Street. They've changed the concept plan so that all the frontage along Northwest Broad Street is to be developed as commercial, and no residential component will be on Northwest Broad Street. They changed the uses designated for the commercial out parcels to primarily be those that would be allowed in the CF zone as opposed to the commercial highway zone. And they eliminated other uses explicitly, such as taverns, vehicle washes, gas stations, general service and repair, and quick cash payday loan facilities. They flipped the location of the townhomes nearest to Broad Street to the other side of the street. They added a playground and formal and active open space in the long straight road to break up the sea of monotony, which was a term used in a previous Planning Commission meeting. They removed the monument signage and mail kiosk from the amenity page. They increased the buffer width adjacent to the North Star Industrial Park, but they did not increase the buffer plantings. So they're proposing a type A buffer adjacent to the North Star Industrial Park. And so there's a type D buffer or type E buffer required on the North Star Industrial Park side of the property line. Staff still has concerns about the interplay between the existing industrial uses and the proposed residential uses. So in other words, while by adding a buffer on their side of the property line, yeah, they're adding to the buffer that's already required on the industrial side of the property line. But what we have concerns about is building in incompatibilities, and if we are going to build into uses that are generally not compatible with each other, that we do have adequate buffering and screening. And so we have, staff has requested that they provide additional landscaping, possibly some earthen berms along that property line, because, I think what we have learned in the past is when we put two incompatible uses next to each other without proper buffering or screening or mitigating site elements, that's a recipe for receiving calls and complaints in the future about what is going on right next to the house that someone bought. So even though someone may go into it fully aware of what is on the other side of the property line, it doesn't mean that we won't get calls and complaints in the future about what might be happening. They included a stub road at Overall Creek at the request of our engineering department. And they revised the architectural elevations in an effort to reduce the snout house effect with the addition of porches, and added some detail and fenestrations to the houses in an effort to improve the architectural character. And so I think they've made great strides in adding detailing to the single-family homes. I think it's a great improvement over what was originally presented back at the, I believe, mid-September Planning Commission meeting. The townhome elevations, we still have some concerns about the side of the townhome elevations facing public streets, because all the streets within this development are going to be public streets. And so I passed out color elevations that were provided by Mr. Taylor before the meeting, and it shows side elevations that would be facing the public right-of-way that are relatively blank except for a window. And so if the Planning Commission sees fit to recommend approval of this zoning request, we would ask for the leeway to continue to work with the applicant before the City Council public hearing to improve the side elevations facing the public right-of-way. Finally, a concern that we have is on the phasing page, they have the phasing of amenities states that the amenities in a given section will not be constructed until prior to the recording of the plat for the next section. And so what we have asked them to do as a compromise is to require those amenities to be constructed prior to the first C of O being issued in the section that the amenity is located in. Our concern is that if we hit another recession and that next section never gets built, then we're stuck in a zoning enforcement situation of trying to get an amenity constructed with a developer that may not actively be developing anymore. So that's kind of the compromise that we have offered. They have decided to continue to request that amenities not be constructed until prior to the recording of the plat for the next section. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions, and Mr. Matt Taylor with SEC has a presentation that he would like to give to you.
Matthew, I've got one question. I got a little lost on the buffer part. Are you saying that they are agreeing to what you have suggested, or you are suggesting it but it hasn't been agreed to?
Mr. Halliburton, I can't imagine with my voice the way it is that I would be unclear in something that I said. No, what they're proposing 20 feet of green space on their side of the property line, but the equivalent number of plantings of a type A buffer, which is just a single row of evergreen trees. What we have requested is something more to help mitigate the incompatibilities between the two uses.
And that has not been agreed upon at this point?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And just further clarification, we're talking about the plantings, not the actual buffer distance.
I think that staff is willing to yield to, obviously, whatever the Planning Commission thinks about distance, about plant materials, about whether earthen berms of some sort would help mitigate. The berms, of course, help mitigate sound. The plantings are more effective visually. So we're certainly open to what ideas the Planning Commission has, if you agreed with staff that more is needed.
Thank you.
Mr. Taylor, good evening.
Thank you, Chairwoman Jones and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Matt Taylor of SEC. I'm accompanied by Mr. Rob Molchin of my office, as well as Mr. Matt Dowdle and Danny Clausen, both of D.R. Horton, the applicants on the project. We're here tonight to give you a presentation over a PUD we've termed River Landing. We want to start by showing you a picture of kind of where the name came from, Overall Creek, the Stones River. We see this as a beautiful asset and amenity for our project, for the property itself, and one of the reasons we think this is a great location for this particular project. So, as Matthew said, we're about 78.5 acres located along Broad Street, about half a mile short of the Florence Road intersection. Most of the property is wooded today with a few clearings from previous uses. The front of the property has a couple of structures from a previous business. I'm not sure exactly what they did there, but I believe it was some sort of business at that location. Along our eastern and northeastern property lines, we have the Overall Creek and Stones River, so you can see that probably half of our property is bounded by a river, and it's not one of our smaller rivers. These are our larger streams in our city, so it's a very nice asset not every property gets to take advantage of. So the property is today a mixture of county RM as well as city RS-15 and city light industrial. This is looking from Singer Road across Broad to our property. You see those existing structures I mentioned earlier. This is another view of one of the streams adjoining our site. And then this is Broad Street. Our property would be to the right of this picture. And you can see a nice 4-lane highway, median divided, shoulder section. We have proposed a PUD to allow a mixed use. That mixture is a mix between commercial, residential detached, and residential attached. We've got about 7 acres of commercial planned up along Broad Street. Our residential is broken down into 101 lots of single-family detached and then 278 single-family attached townhouses. That gives us a density of about 5.3 units to the acre, and we maintain over 40% of the site as open space at 30 acres. And then we've also committed to underground utilities, as most of our projects do today. All of our homes here will be for sale. We will convey the townhouses through our HBR or horizontal property regime. We will have a very walkable community with sidewalks along both sides of all of our streets. We've incorporated additional walking trail in our largest open spaces that's going to connect with pavilion and hopefully some canoe launches along the rivers. All of that open space will be maintained by the HOA. That HOA will be mandatory for all of our owners, and it'll be managed by a third-party association. We've got buffers located at strategic locations. The townhouses will utilize a compactor for their trash pickup, while the single-family detached will utilize the city trash pickup, and then we'll have public streets throughout the project. The single-family detached, we envision all these to be 2 stories, start at a minimum of 1,250 square feet, and all of these will have 2-car garages. We've selected high-quality materials, brick, stones, fiber cement board. The only vinyl would be in the trim and soffit areas. We think that you'll see that we've added a lot of detail in the garage, the porches. We've got corbels, lighting, decorative doors. We tried to pull those garages forward, allowing those to set inside the front setback to make those more attractive along the street. All of our columns will be proportional to the house, so you don't have just a stick. We got shutters, corbels. We'll have some dormers in locations. Townhouses will use the same palette of building materials. We envision all those to be 2 stories and start at 1,200 square feet, and then have at least 1-car garage. All of our garages and the townhouses, as well as the single family, will be restricted in our HOA documents against storage, so that they have to be used for vehicular uses. I think you'll see on our front elevations for the townhouses, we spend a lot of time on the roof line. We work that front plane in and out. We vary the materials. We've got some nice porches and stoops there. The rear, I think you'll see a lot of windows with some extra detail and of covered doors on the rear. I think that's something unique. And we've tried to create a little privacy with fences in between each unit. And then the side, we've also feel like we've brought the overall height of the structure down by using a gable on the side there, in addition to the window itself. And anywhere that a side faces a public road, we were asked by staff to do a type C buffer, and so you'll see in the book we've outlined exactly where all those are, anywhere that a side abuts a public right-of-way. Amenities, we've tried to spread those throughout, make it a highly amenitized development. We've started with development entry signage at Northwest Broad, create that community feel as you come in. And I mentioned we really want to exemplify our overall creek and Stones River. We're planning a couple of canoe launches. We've listed those as possible because that has to go through a pretty strenuous permitting exercise with TDEC and the Corps, but we are hopeful to get those. We feel like that would set our neighborhood apart from most any other neighborhood in Murfreesboro. We've created a fairly substantial and architecturally pleasing pavilion that's going to be located nearest our largest green space toward the back of the property that would host birthday parties, graduation parties. It would also link in with the walking trail in this area, which would lead down to the river. Our largest structured amenity would be the pool and the pool house, which is toward the center of the neighborhood, which would be convenient to all of our residents. And then we've scattered several playgrounds throughout. A couple of these would be flanked by kind of unstructured amenity or active areas, so you can go play some flag football, any of those sorts of events that you can't play on the smaller lots. Commercial was envisioned to round out the mixed-use component of the development, and here we don't know of our definitive users here, but we do know that we want those to be an asset to our neighborhood. We're making a large investment. We're going to be here for 5 to 7 years, and so we want all high-quality materials. We started with the commercial fringe uses, and we've dwindled those down even further, so they are entirely compatible with our neighborhood, and we've said that those have to be four-sided architecture. Access points, our first access point that we'd build with Section 1 would come off Broad Street. It would align with Singer. This would be a signalized intersection as well as turn lanes. And then in Section 2, we would construct the second access point onto Northwest Broad Street. It would have turn lanes constructed with that. And as Mr. Blomley said, we have provided a stub and dedicated right-of-way to our property line so that once the property across the creek develops, it can be connected to when you have another way in and out for better connectivity. And then our commercial lots along the front, we've dictated that they will have to have interconnectivity through their parking lots so that all of them will have access back to the signalized intersection without going through our neighborhood streets. And we've also shown a shared access on the internal lots of those commercial out on the Broad Street. Buffering, we spent a lot of time on buffering. The flashing green area there, that's an existing or under construction type D and E buffer. And then adjoining that, we would construct a type A buffer, which entirely complies with the ordinance. Between those two, we would have, between their parking on the industrial side and our townhouses, we'd have approximately 55 feet at a minimum. And so that's right in line with what we recently did at the South Rutherford Industrial Park. And this would actually have more landscaping than that particular project, as it was just doing a type E. We have planned for type C buffers along the commercial in this area. That would actually be constructed as those commercial lots develop out. And then, as I mentioned just a minute ago, at the end of any townhouse units, we would do that abut public right-of-way. We would plan a type C buffer. We've utilized that in other developments in those situations. And then a few of the things Mr. Blomley mentioned, the buffering, we think that one, it complies with the ordinance, and two, it complies with items that we've done very recently. And we talked about that width and that type of buffering at, I think, our very first workshops. We feel like we've addressed that adequately. The phasing on the amenities, we feel like asking to construct that amenity prior to the very next plat. So most of our phases are 60 to 80. So we feel like that's a very reasonable time frame. It just takes a different trade. It takes a different craftsman to go out there. And so instead of holding a plat or holding a C of O, we're talking about a maximum of 60 lots or the next phase, whether it's 60 or 80, before that next amenity is done. So we're not trying to backload the development. We've made very hard commitments on when each of these amenities will be constructed. We think that's a very fair approach to that. And then the side elevations, we feel like we did exactly what Ms. Green said, was, put the type C buffer against the right of way. So, but we're happy to continue working on that if they would like to see something different. But that's what we thought we needed to do. So I'll be happy to answer any questions now or after the public hearing.
Matt, talk to me a little bit about the townhomes. We've got one-car garages, okay?
Yes, sir.
We got probably an area that another car can park there in the driveway, right?
So all the driveways will be two-car driveways. The rendering doesn't show the driveway width very well.
Okay.
But the garages will be one car, the driveways will be two car, and then we've tried to concentrate visitor parking in the townhouse areas as well.
So as part of the HOA, are you gonna eliminate on-street parking?
Yes, sir.
These things say 3 bedrooms. I mean,
So each one will have 3 spaces counting the garage, and then we're gonna have the visitor parking.
Is it too
I
wide or
assume that we could, excuse me?
too wide or too stacked?
Too wide. We could restrict through our HOA documents on the on-street parking. I don't know how much we can enforce that since they're public streets, but we can certainly put it in there so it can, that wouldn't be a problem.
Can I ask, and I'm not sure which one of you, whether Mr. Blomley or Mr. Taylor, so when we're talking about the buffering on the industrial side, so they are in the process of putting buffering in on the industrial property side?
So one of them has a buffer already constructed because the building's been there for maybe a decade, I'm not sure. But the other one is actively under construction. Matter of fact, they're trying to get a C of O. They're just not quite ready. And so that buffer may be installed today, but it may still be under construction. So by the time we got there, that buffer would definitely be in place.
And so what is that buffer?
That
is
would
it
be a type E.
E?
Yes, ma'am. And I think the one that is there today is a type D because I think the city changed their requirement between the time both of those were built.
And so how wide is the E? Is it width and height, or does it have a berm, or what? Tell me about the type E.
Type E buffers they can have a berm option. I don't believe that there's a berm in any of those. Mr. Taylor, do you recollect if there's?
We've got a picture on page 10.
Okay.
Picture number 3 gives you an idea of that existing buffer on the existing site today. So I would anticipate, you see it's heavy evergreen material, and so that's the existing. So I don't think that one has a berm.
So that one's not a buffer that they installed. That's what was there.
No, they definitely installed some of those. I'm seeing some trees in front. You're also seeing some existing trees in the background, so there's
okay.
definitely a mixture there.
That's the property.
I'm so far not sold yet on the buffer on the townhome side, on the smaller buffer on the townhome side. So we can wait and discuss that after the public hearing, or, but so far.
Whenever you want to discuss
I need
it.
some more,
Matt, how would the commercial properties access Highway 41 there? Would they come back through the neighborhood, into the neighborhood and use the light, or would they be coming out onto the roadway?
So
It appears that they're coming out onto Broad Street or,
let me, if you can bring the monitor back up. Or there you go. And so you see the red line. Let me take it away. I'll add it back. There you go. So you see that red line that's up there now? So we're saying all of those will be interconnected so that they can go back to both of either the streets. Primarily, we would like them to go back to the signal. The two middle lots where we've got 4 drawn between the two middle lots, we've shown one shared access right there so they could access Broad directly since they're internal. But the rest of those would access off the 2 new roads.
Are you having more questions on that? And so on the amenities and when they'll be completed, so for example, the pool and the pool house or whatever you have there for the larger pool area is part of Phase 1, Section 1. And so you're saying then that what you would like to do is not start on the pool until you've recorded the plat for Section 2? Is that what we're talking about?
So for the pool, we said we would have it up and operational before Section 3 plat is recorded. And the reason we did that is we typically look at installing pools between 100 and 150 houses. And so after Section 2, we would have about 130, 135 homes constructed. And so it would actively be under construction in our mind in probably Section 2, and then we would have it up and operational before that 3rd plat's recorded. And then for instance, we've got a playground that we show in Section 2. That would be installed prior to Section 3 plat being recorded. And the same thing, we've got actually we got 2 playgrounds. We got another playground shown in Section 3 that would be installed before Section 4 plat's recorded. And so we're not trying to dump everything on the backside. We're just saying that next plat, that way we can adequately get in there and do that. You know, we're happy to, if we don't want to wait to the next plat, you know, we could look at something like 50% C of Os in each phase. But the first C of O, D.R. Horton can build a house in 45 or 60 days. And sometimes, you know, getting that playground, if it's on back order or something like that, getting a new trade in there. And so we're just saying the first C of O is just too quick. And we understand that the city needs a mechanism to hold us accountable. We're not trying to get out of that. We're just saying, hey, this over here seems like a more logical standpoint. And we understand that the last downturn, you had some people walk away and never got their amenities. But if that's the case, then we're walking away after our first phase. And we don't need to overload a small number of people with a big HOA bill either. So we need to keep that side of it in effect. Because if my client's not there, all the HOA bill comes down to whoever's living in that development. Because on the front side, my client would be supplementing and taking care of most of that HOA bill until the neighborhood's built out.
I think I'd be leaning towards a 50 to 75% of the section we're in.
So after, say we record Section 1, and so before we'd have the playgrounds or whatever done, before 50 or 75% of those C of Os are done in each section.
You start them after 50 and it has to be complete before 75% or whatever you all, I mean, I don't know the details, but I think it needs something.
We could live with that. We would like to leave the pool set at the time frame, but the rest of the amenities, we could live with that, absolutely.
Ms. Jones, if I may interject.
Sure.
The keeping up with 50 or 75% of how many C of Os have been granted.
You name what it should be. I don't.
Well, just keeping track of how many C of Os are issued, that just becomes an administrative burden to staff. And if it's between, you know, I think if it's prior to the first C of O, that's easier for us to keep up with. If it's before the next plat is recorded, that's easier for us to keep up with. But trying to keep track of how many C of Os have been issued would just be very, very difficult administrative task.
Okay, then what were you looking for? Because you didn't like, when we're going to wait for the next plat to get recorded, what were you looking for?
We had requested, so Mr. Taylor is correct about the timing of the big ticket amenity item, which
Sure.
with the pool and the clubhouse.
I agree with
We certainly understand that there needs to be some kind of economy of scale to build such a large amenity. What we had asked for were the more small ticket, if you will, amenities to be constructed with each section, the playgrounds, the pavilions, the canoe launches, if permitted by the appropriate authorities. So it's kind of the middle ground that we had reached. It was our desire to see those constructed prior to the plat being recorded for that particular section. In lieu of that, we had tried to have some middle ground, and we offered prior to the issuance of the first C of O so that they could keep on going with building permits. But prior to the first person living in there, that amenity that's in that section would be available. That's what we suggested. But fully understanding that there was the need to delay the big ticket amenity.
Matthew, is there any concern at all with the potential merger of Middle Tennessee Electric and Murfreesboro Electric, that Murfreesboro Electric currently cannot provide electricity to this property, the whole property? Is there any concern that if there were a merger, that Middle Tennessee Electric could say it's not advantageous to us to provide electricity to that area? I mean, or is there an obligation there that we're committing to that will make sure that it happens? I mean, is there any obligation whatsoever to the city?
Can I answer that? I mean, I can't answer for the obligation, but I can tell you that whenever we heard the merger talk come up, we went and visited. We'd already had the conversation with MED. We went and visited with Middle Tennessee Electric along with MED in the same meeting, and we walked away comfortable that that this upgrade would happen regardless. And obviously, the last thing that we need to do is buy 80 acres and only be able to build the first 100 lots. Probably several of us would be without a job if we did that. So we're very comfortable that that will happen regardless.
How comfortable are you being located next to an incompatible usage?
We really like this location. We have gotten comfortable with what we see around us, Mr. Smotherman, Councilman Smotherman.
Shall we open the public hearing?
Can we go back to Eddie's question about the commercial lots and access to 41? I got a little lost there. Are you saying that the two interior lots would have access to 41 themselves?
We show one shared access that's on their property line there. It would effectively be a right in, right out. That would obviously have to be permitted by TDOT.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I see.
Any other questions before we open the public hearing?
I have a question on the C of O. So could you do it where they had it before the last C of O? It has to be complete before the last C of O? I mean,
Yep.
is that still a nightmare?
I mean, I guess anything's possible, but it would just be, then we've got to come up with some tracking mechanism to track the C of Os, whether it's, up into the last one, and then we've got to have building and codes put a hold on the last C of O. It just becomes difficult, I guess.
Then I would ask the question of, this can't be new, so what have we done in the past?
I think in the past, we've been more lenient. I think that we've heard from the Planning Commission of late, though, that having amenities available for residents is important, and it's a priority. And so we're, I think, trying to take our direction that, from what we've heard, that availability of amenities is important. And so, but we're certainly, whatever the Planning Commission feels is appropriate, we're,
You can correct me, Matthew, but I'm almost positive we had this come up, or the question come up on a development that Gary Wisniewski was involved in Landmark Homes, and he agreed to do these types of amenities on the front end, if I'm not mistaken, just in the last couple of months.
I believe that would be Pretoria Falls.
Yeah.
I don't recollect the phasing of that development.
I'm kind of torn. I don't see the need to have it in there with the first house, but I think
And
within that section, it should be, and I don't know I don't know.
and I think what we're proposing accomplishes that very thing. We don't move to the next section until, on the plat, until it's installed on the section that we're building in. So that's exactly what we're proposing.
There's also the possibility of rather than holding C of Os, we could hold, it would be easier to track to hold permits instead of C of Os. So we could release a certain number of permits, say choose 50% of the permits in this section. That would be easier to track because on the front end, the Building and Codes Department would put in what lots would be allowed to be permitted.
Okay.
And I'm also struggling with that being a two-car drive and giving the illusion that somehow there's a front yard in front of that house, when the reality is there is no front yard if you double the size of that driveway. I mean, it's deceptive by nature in the sense that it's misleading us saying that there's a green space in front of that house, when if you double the size of that drive and half of the front of the building is the garage, then basically the majority of that front yard is driveway. And so, and not that we haven't had neighborhoods like that before, but I don't want to look at that picture and think that that's what we're going to actually see when it gets out there, because that's just unrealistic. And I'll go ahead and air my biggest concern with this whole thing is the location. I was riding past it a couple of days ago with an individual in the car with me, and I asked somebody in the car with me, I said, if you lived right here as we're riding past this property on Broad Street, I said, if you lived right here, where would you do your business? Where would you shop? Where would you conduct your business? And they looked at me and they said, Smyrna, why? And I said, that's all I need to know. That's the answer to my question. I'm just concerned that we're giving away a ton of sewer taps right here in a incompatible area that is probably better for an industrial usage. I just think it's the wrong project for this property. And ultimately, there's no scenario that I see that we should go out here and try and provide police service and fire service and everything else to these residents when there's not going to be any tax-based recovery, which is the way I'm looking at it, because I'm responsible to the taxpayers. And there will not be a recovery if these people that live here shop in Smyrna.
Any other comments or questions before we open the public hearing? I don't get a public hearing in here yet.
Let's have one.
Okay, let's have it. We'll open the public hearing and ask anybody to come forward that would like to speak on this item. Please state your name and address.
My name is Nicole Barnes. I'm at 5080 Florence Road. I am the Director of Operations for Journey Pure, whose property butts up against this development, and we have concerns about privacy. And it being a development it's a little controversial to what we do. We're privately owned medical facility, co-occurring rehabilitation, drug and alcohol. We treat mental health as well. And it's just important that we keep a buffer of some sort, preferably not an A, maybe something closer to a D. If at all possible, we would like to ask if that could be appropriate for the areas that are really close visually to our facilities.
Yeah, I think that's their building right there.
Mr. Blomley, can you, is it here or is it over here?
We could pull up the laptop. It would be here. So it borders the detention pond, and then this row of single-family homes right here. This property line.
Oh, okay,
Where the two cul-de-sacs are
I
is
see.
the Roselawn property.
I see. Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, Ms. Barnes, appreciate it.
And I'm still confused. So their building is directly to the north? Is that what we're seeing? Is this the building?
We pull up the GIS map.
We got it. I got it.
Yeah, so
Yeah, that's it.
right there.
And there's no buffer right there.
Yeah, there's not. Okay, anybody else like to speak? Sure.
Danny Clausen with D.R. Horton. I want to answer the incompatible usage question from Mr. Eddy.
Mr. Smotherman.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Smotherman. Completely disagree with it, honestly. If you're driving down the road, I could see where someone would, at face value, understand that. But you step foot on that property and it completely changes your mind. You have to ask the question of why would you put light industrial on such a beautiful piece of property? I think stands the biggest question, I've got a lot of great memories of my dad and my granddad taking me on creek banks having some good times, okay? I don't think light industrial is going to utilize this property like it needs to be utilized. Okay? I've spent hours on this property, and it is amazing how beautiful that is, okay? I would love to know that my son lives there, and when he goes to have my grandbabies, that they could go there and after dinner, they can walk down and chunk rocks in that creek. Enjoy fishing, which is really just chunking rocks to them little guys. It is absolutely amazing down there. I think trying to put light industrial there, complete waste of that property. It's just not what it is, okay? I am the builder, the developer, the seller of this property, okay, if you guys allow this, okay? And I will fully disclose. Anyone can see exactly what's beside this property, okay? I will put it in writing. They will have to sign off and fully understand what's beside it. We can work through the buffer situation. That's a minute issue, okay? Right now, you've got 30, 40, 50-foot eastern red cedars, okay, that are acting as a beautiful buffer right now. That's going to be better than any buffer we can plant. But if we need to add some additional buffers, let's do it, okay? But, I agree. You drive down the road and you look at it, it was a head scratcher the first time I drove by and looked at it, okay? But you step foot on that property and you see it, and you walk Overall Creek, and you walk Stone River, okay? That's for families to build memories. That's not to put another tire shop or put another industrial issue, okay? This is Murfreesboro, and we build families here, okay? And that's the property for families. That's not the property for another commercial site or light industrial site. It's just not it, okay? I invite any of y'all to step out on that property. You're going to love it, okay? And you're going to hope that your kids and your grandkids live there, because it is going to be amazing. It's going to be beautiful. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Close the public hearing.
I'll make some just kind of general comments.
Thank you.
One, obviously this plan looks very different than when it originally came to planning. Some of the things that we were concerned about were the heavier residential use closer to Broad Street. That has been addressed. I do understand the comment related to maybe not the full spirit of the mixed use design, but we do have some mixed use, mixed into that, so certainly respect that view. But I do think too, you know, and I think it was Mr. Smotherman that raised this in planning, we kind of had a racetrack chute in front of the townhouses there that backed up to the that long run of houses, and you know, that's been addressed to the point of the green space in front of the townhouses. I do think if you look at the overall green space of the development, you know, I think in any project that we do, you could look at certain areas where you can say there's not a tremendous amount of green space in front of a particular home. But overall, if you're getting green space in the development, I do think that's the spirit of what we're trying to do. And, you know, from, I certainly respect Councilman Smotherman's view on the city taxpayer and the boundaries associated with the city limits, but you know, when you look at the property that touches this, you know, we've got a lot of city property all around this property, and there's a reasonable assumption that, you know, we will continue to encroach and box in and color some of these areas based on other annexation that we've done. Just a personal opinion, I think when you want to see more commercial development in some of these areas, you've got to have some new rooftops there to do it, and to have 380 rooftops to feed some of the commercial, you know, for lack of a better word, commercial fringe property on Broad Street. I think that's attractive in some ways, and I think, you know, the developer's listening. So I'm going to be in support of it. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Martin.
Yeah, I think, Ronnie, Mr. Martin, my concern, once you pass 840, leaving Murfreesboro.
Yes, sir.
There's nothing residential out there. There's just, this is an anomaly in the middle of a industrial area. You've got a Nissan cross-dock operation across the street. You've got what was a junkyard property that I have no idea what it'll develop into. You've got a cemetery. You've got a mental health facility out there, but they're not. You've got a tire company there. There's nothing there that says compatibility with a neighborhood, and that's the part that I struggle so much with, is trying to figure out what makes that compatible when, you know, and I love the river idea of thinking, you know, it's next to a beautiful river. It really is, and I've often thought that we should take more advantage of our rivers as far as the compatibility, but once you pass 840, this is just an area that's going to require services that we're currently not directing out there. We don't have any school buses running out there. We don't have any law enforcement going out there that's doing residential, dealing with residential type concerns. We don't have, you know, I'm sure we've got fire coverage to it, but and it is very dense, and I'll go back to my conversation when we're looking at trying to preserve as many sewer taps as we can so that we can have development that would be 2 or 3 units per acre. There has to be an offset when you build this, and I just don't see those coming through. So if we're going to approve this type situation with high density, and it needs to at least be in an area where we already have those services in place, so that it's not an additional cost to the taxpayers of the city of Murfreesboro to provide services to this area that we're currently not serving.
Are we serving subdivisions off of Florence Road?
Our boundaries on Florence Road are further to the south of Northwest Broad Street. We have very little on Florence Road in the vicinity of Broad Street. Most of the neighborhoods, if not all the neighborhoods, directly adjacent to Broad Street are in the unincorporated county. on Florence Road itself, there's the Dollar General and the city mulch and solid waste facility. But once you get north of Broad Street, that's just generally in the unincorporated county. And if you're heading south on Florence Road, it's south of Old Nashville Highway before you hit the city limits again.
So if you look at the land adjacent to the river, that's adjacent to this property, what's the future land use map show going back towards Murfreesboro?
So that pink area on the map that I just put up, and I apologize for the poor quality of it, that pink area is that urban commercial mixed use land use character, which is kind of a high intensity urban commercial type development, kind of typified when you look at like a downtown with kind of a urban village with mixed use buildings constructed to the sidewalk, kind of creating an urban feel. So that whole area that's in the pink is that urban commercial mixed use land use designation.
So then is the expectation that the population would grow going that way?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of land that is along Northwest Broad Street that's raw land, and one of the things that is kind of on our to-do list is to do a Northwest Broad Street, Old Nashville Highway small area plan or a corridor study to dig down further into what the 2035 land use plan suggests and come up with a more detailed land use study for that corridor. But I'm sorry, in my yammering, I lost track of your question, Mr. Russell.
Well, I mean, the train of thought is we're making a decision on this, looking at this solely. You need to be making a decision on this, looking at what it's going to be in the future. So if we expect the population to grow in this area, then it's an easy decision. You can say, okay, well, the density's fine because we want that level of density and that's where we want to grow. But if the future land use map showed we want hotels out there, then it's another easy decision because it makes no sense to put this out there.
Well, and one thing to keep in mind, and we do have our sewer guru, Mr. Gore, here, is that, as he makes a face as I say that, is that the densities that were envisioned for the urban commercial mixed use, which is 60, so my voice doesn't throw anybody off, 60 dwelling units per acre, whether or not something like that would even be supported based upon our sewer allocation ordinance. I think one of the things that we are going to have to do is take a look, revisit our future land use map in light of our sewer allocation ordinance if it passes, because the recommendations for the density for this property may not be realistic. And I may look to Mr. Gore for maybe just some general thoughts on that if he wishes.
While he's coming up, I've often heard this corridor referred to as Gateway 2.0, and I guess the question would be is if you're thinking about developing it like the Gateway as a main corridor coming into Murfreesboro with that type atmosphere, is this really conducive with what you would think Gateway 2.0 is? Because that's the direction and that I'm understanding we're developing it, which means there's going to be hotels there, there's going to be restaurants there, there's going to be, and truly, I think it's a great opportunity to have an additional gateway coming into the city of Murfreesboro, because if you look at the current gateway, if you were to just overlay that into this area, I've often complained about, car lots not being up to standard along the roadways, and especially in this area. and junkyards and stuff like that. I don't think that's exactly what we want screaming, welcome to Murfreesboro. And so I think there's an opportunity here for a really good development, but I just, you know, again, I don't think it's Gateway 2.0.
60 units per acre won't work, just to be quite frank. All this feeds to the overall creek pump station. So we are, for those of you that were at our ADS, kind of our sewer capacity study that we had at O&M a couple of weeks ago, we're looking at doubling the capacity of the overall creek pump station now. And my envision is Gateway 2.0 and similar to what you see out on Medical Center Parkway now. And so, you know, with doubling the pump station capacity, we could support hotel motels at the level that you see on Medical Center Parkway, and Embassy Suites, the Holiday Inn, and so forth. So the Florence Road area, the master plan that was done for the Florence Road area, of which this is a part, we looked at a density of around 3.3 units per acre. Now, I haven't gone back and done an assessment of this area like we have on the Salem Highway, because we have gotten the Nissan, what did you call it there? The cross-dock operation, and then we've got the Public Works facility. I will say, for those of you that were around 15 or so years ago, they talked about the gateway being US 41 coming into the city, and that the sewer being put out there to support all of this would be a gateway into the city and spur redevelopment, and it has not. I mean, we can just see there's not been a lot of activity out there in the last 15 to 20 years. So I can't really, can we support the 5.3 units per acre in the sewer capacity? Yes, we can. We can't do 60. Is the timing of it compatible with what you envision as Gateway 2.0? That's the question on the table for you all. But from a sewer standpoint, we've got the capacity to handle it.
Thank you, Mr. Gore.
Thank you.
Other comments and questions?
So I'm not against this necessarily. However, I do think there are pieces and parts that need to get remedied, may not be the right word, but agreed upon. And it's more than just one. And you know, I think it's going to take the staff and the applicant to get together to remedy those things. I think there's people on this board that are definitely against it. But you know, I'm not prepared to vote for it until these items are remedied. So, you know, my idea would be to defer it, but that's just an opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Halliburton.
I'll speak up as well, and I'm for this. I think it's a nice development. I can see the concerns. You know, it doesn't 100% align with the 2035 plan, but I do think it addresses bringing in both commercial and residential, and I think it will spawn some good things for this area. I do think, I agree with Mr. Halliburton, there are things to work out. I feel like some of them could potentially get there if we had some quick agreement on a few things. The buffer on the side that Ms. Barnes brought up, and I think the amenities piece is very important to be very clear on the expectation so that those folks don't get left with nothing if something were to change.
The one thing that I would add to that is, I'd have to agree with Mr. Smotherman's, I don't see, I'd love to see what this really looks like before I vote on it. Because if we add another 25 feet, I don't know, whatever that number is, I'm not the developer person, but
We'll have that updated to accurately reflect that for you, Mr. Halliburton. I think we're happy to sit back down with staff. We're always willing to sit down and work with them. I think we'd like a little bit of guidance on the buffer and the phasing. I mean, I won't say we're at an impasse, but we would just like a little bit of guidance from you all, and then we can sit back down with staff and talk about the buffer and the phasing as the main things. The buffer against Journey Pure, you can actually see their buildings on our concept plan. That gives you a pretty good idea of how we interact with their site. One of their buildings is about 300 to 400 feet away from our property line and has a very nice tree row. Well, it's more than a tree row. It's a grove of trees, if you will. And then they've got another building that's closer to the property line, but still about 50 feet off, I think. And it sits where our large detention pond would in the back. So I think they've got a lot of protection. We did that site plan, and I know they tried to stay off of those areas very purposefully. They tried to amenitize the river as well when they worked on that, so.
Well, I think the biggest thing for me is the lots 40 through 56, where it looks like you're right up against their property line.
We're right up against our property line, but their closest building that's on their site is 300 to 400 feet from our property line.
And is that a lot of vegetation between, looks like some open area and then some vegetation up closer to their building?
Yes, ma'am. There's a large clump of trees, grove, however you want to term that. I'd say there's probably 100 foot of what looks like open area between us and that clump of trees, and then it goes to trees and it goes to their building. And I don't remember the use of that building. I'm sure that this nice lady could tell me that.
So with not a larger buffer there, would you propose there be plantings of some sort, like a tree, or is it?
I'm happy to go back. That's just not an area that we've looked at, so we're happy to look at that area on the buffer, and we might be able to shift some things around in there. I guess it really depends on what you think the adequate buffering is over on the west side where we butt up against the industrial, because I'm sandwiched in both sides there, and obviously, roads are the width that they are, and you've got to have a buildable envelope as well. So,
and what I would, as far as the property line abutting Journey Pure, I think what my suggestion would be to exchange information with Ms. Nicole over there and find out what her concerns are, whether it's aesthetics, whether it's to prohibit access onto their property. Find out what kind of barrier or buffer would work best adjacent to their property, and then try to honor the best they can so that
Fence
it might be a fence.
along the back of those, possibly, on that.
I think we just talk to her and see what they would prefer.
we could certainly do that.
And certainly, if y'all have direction, if there is any change that you wish to be made to the buffer that's proposed adjacent to the residential, we would certainly appreciate direction on that. If there's no change to it, we would appreciate that direction as well.
I do feel like we need to have, I realize you have a certain amount of space there, but
Move these houses. That's why it's a concern.
I certainly agree that it could be something more than an A buffer. I don't know whether that means then you're going to berm in the space that you have and then add some vegetation on top, or what you can
Okay.
work out, but and I realize you've got that on the other side, but I agree with staff that, you know, they're going to be the ones dealing with it, and we need to do all we can to buffer it. I think it needs to be more than an A-type buffer, even whether we're talking about width, add the height if we have to, but whatever we have to do in the space that you have. I mean,
Okay.
I'd be willing to look at that.
Matt, we also didn't
Ma'am.
talk specifically about the end units and the type C buffers at the end. Is that, are those fairly plain ends? So is it driven by what's in the building itself, or is it just a way
So,
to minimize cost on the buildings themselves?
I think what I had talked to my client about was that, if you can, hopefully this shows up, we had talked about adding some windows up on the second floor, and it comes down to use. That area right there is, you know, it's a bedroom, and so you need a wall that you can put a bed on somewhere, and so they're reluctant to put the window there. I think that's really what that came down to, Ms. Garland, is the use on the other side of that wall.
And
You know, commercial uses, you can put kind of a faux window. That's hard to do right there.
And if, depending on what the planning commission feels is appropriate there, we've suggested a buffer as an option, or if you would like to give us the leeway in between now and when it comes back up, if you decide to defer it, to work on improving those facades that abut public rights of way. You know, one thing that I can see that I think would immediately provide some break to that monotony would be like a brick or stone water table up to the bottom of that window. I think would break up the monotony, and I'm sure there are other things that could be done.
Wraparound porch or something. It's pretty plain. I know we've pushed a lot of times in the past to really not let it be that plain on the ends, and I think definitely needs to be worked on.
Well, we'd be happy to work with them on that.
But did you all discuss the possibility of deferral, Mr. Taylor?
Yes, and if y'all would like to see more work done, I'm perfectly happy to do that. So we're fine with the deferral. We'll try to get back by the workshop. We'll see what we can do maybe next month at this night meeting. So
I do just feel like there's enough little items that we
sure,
just
that's not a problem.
feel uncomfortable with, that I would be more comfortable with a deferral.
So I'll make a motion, we defer.
Second.
Motion to defer. All in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
And if I could just get a clarification, is that an indefinite deferral so that we don't lock ourselves down to a meeting if, in the event they're not ready to come back?
Sure.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Thank y'all for your help and working with us on that. We appreciate it. Okay, moving on to staff reports and other business. We have one item that we know of tonight under there, and it is the consideration of the sewer allocation ordinance. City Administration Department, and Mr. Gore, welcome.
Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to come before you tonight. I know after a couple hours, this may not be the most exciting thing to consider, but did want to take the opportunity to kind of give you an abbreviated presentation of what we've now done twice at two council workshops. We did at your afternoon meeting. We did have a stakeholder meeting on this as well. So I've tried to put this simple graphic up to show a sewer system. We actually have a separate sewer system. The yellow-brown lines is sanitary sewer waste. It's separate from our storm sewer system. That's why it's called a separate sewer system, because our storm sewer goes straight to the river. So these pipes convey the raw sewage. They're expandable, but it's very expensive to expand. They take them to a wastewater treatment plant, which we call our water resource recovery facility now. It's new nomenclature. Again, it's expandable, but very expensive to expand. And then the ultimate outcome is that the treated effluent goes into the West Fork Stones River, and that river assimilates that waste stream, which we wouldn't consider it a waste stream. We actually think we're putting in cleaner water than the river contains currently. We have to convince TDEC of that. But the river is obviously not expandable. It is a finite resource, and that is the real trick, is to try to convince TDEC that it can handle more of our effluent. So I'm going to use these houses to kind of represent basins. I'm sorry. The wastewater plant has 24 million gallons a day capacity, which we're saying roughly is around 92,300 single-family unit total, of which we have almost 26,900 single-family unit capacity remaining. So in 1999 and 2005, we used our basin studies to size the collection system. The collection system being these yellow and brown lines. Overall Creek, we sized the pipe to handle almost 42,000 single-family units. Buchanan, 8,500, Salem, 6,800, Rockvale, 3,800, Lytle Creek, 31,500. So these lines that you see, those are the things that are primarily dealing with the density. The plant can handle 27,000 units in the future. Where we're having issues currently is with the fact that we size these pipes to handle a certain density in these watersheds that we have seen higher densities than what we were designing for. So that's really the impetus behind the sewer allocation ordinance. So this is something you saw if you were at our ADS report meeting. Green and yellow are pretty good. Green's good, yellow's pretty good. This shows our basins from a geographic. These can kind of be represented by those pipes I just showed earlier. Summertime, we really don't have an issue. Everything's good. We have issues in the wintertime when plants are no longer evapotranspiring water from the ground, when we don't have any evaporation from the sun, and we have a lot of groundwater infiltration, and that does get its way into the sewer system, and then we see what we call wet weather flows compounded with peak daily flows. And so this shows our WRF, our Water Resource Recovery Facility. You can see that one spike. We had a rain event back in February, March of last year, or of this year rather, that we were almost 60 million gallons a day 60 million gallons a day. When we're saying we got a 24 MGD plant, we can hydraulically handle more, but this is pretty dilute, pretty much just inundated with storm water. Things get flooded. I think I said it the other day, when the water gets out of the stream banks, you can pretty much be assured that water is getting into our sanitary sewer system, and we're getting hammered pretty hard at the plant. So the purpose of requesting this recommendation is that this draft ordinance affects density based on the limitations that we've identified in our sewer collection system capacity. And we want to solicit a recommendation to City Council from Planning Commission that ensures that future annexations, zoning, rezoning requests, land use is coordinated with the single-family unit densities that the sanitary sewer system can serve. This is the Salem Highway. This is kind of the case study where it kind of opened my eyes to what has happened in the past 19 years. We had a master plan in 2000, and I'm going to talk in round numbers here, almost 1,800 acres of greenfield and roughly 6,800, we planned for about 6,800 single-family units, so that's an overall density of 3.8 single-family units per acre. When I did a 2019 kind of an as-is assessment of what has happened in 19 years, we had 866, so almost just under half of this acreage developed, 3,700 single-family units, so we actually had an overall density of around 4.3, which is 12% higher, which doesn't sound like a lot, and it's, again, our system is handling it. But in order to get back to what the system was originally designed for, now we have to take a 3.4 single-family unit to get, so it's a 21% reduction of what we have historically allowed in the last 19 years. And so that's somewhat significant. So on the remaining 922 acres, we really should only be allowing about 3,100 units. Otherwise, we inundate that particular pipe that wasn't sized to handle that increased density, if that makes sense. So, and I said, well, a lot of people said, well, how can you just take one basin and kind of blanket say that this is happening all over the city? So I went back and looked at the residential permitting trend from actually almost 30 years. You can see from 1990 to 99, we were averaging 985 residential permits per year. 2000 to 2009, 1,775, and 2010 to 2018, that residential permits went up to 2,772 per year. What we saw, there was a 38% decrease in detached single-family units. There was an increase of 26% in multifamily, and we saw a 12% increase in attached single-family units. So I'm kind of using this broad brush residential permit analysis to kind of say, I can pretty safely assume we've allowed 12% densities in higher over the last 19 years than what maybe the sewer systems were designed for. So what does that culminate into? Well, we're based on our average there's an average daily flow, if you kind of remember the green and yellow map, and then we've got a peak daily flow, which is kind of this purple and red map, which is the winter. We're looking at, based on population projections from to the 2035, that we're going to reach our average daily flow of 24 million gallons a day in 2029, 10 years. The red line shows what the peak is, which, again, that's something that we have to handle hydraulically at the plant, and there's technology and hopefully permitting techniques we can use to handle those large rate events. So in developing this allocation ordinance, I went back and I said, well, let me go back and look at what has happened in the city in the last 10 years. So Jerry Lee, using his magic, these color-coded areas is the areas that were annexed into the city from 2009 to 2019. There was a 12% increase in the city limits during this time frame, which equated to about 4,200 acres. So I'm saying that the goal is to take future land use and maintain that 3.4 single-family unit per acre. And you say, well, what future land use proportion do you expect to use? That's why I looked at the history here and said industrial 2.4%, parks 3.5, commercial 35.4, residential is 55.1, multifamily 3.6. So I kind of use these proportions to say, hey, if this happened in the last 10 years, it's safe to assume we can move forward with these same proportions in the future. I may be remiss by saying that I do believe that there is a future land use map. It's a proposal that's being formulated now that's going to maybe hone in a little bit better on these percentages from a socioeconomic development perspective. So that's how I kind of came back and I said, okay, if 3.4 is what we're looking for on average, I developed what you would call a flux rate, right? So much gallons per day of sewer per acre, and applied those percentages and came up with a single family unit per acre count for each of the different land use categories, and effectively balanced it out to say, if we have a percent total, or using the percent total of previous annexation land uses, and applied these flux rates, which equals a single family unit per acre density, this will get us to that 3.4 single family per unit average. So this is where a future land use plan is going to have to tie back to this table and determine if we're saying 11% is medium density, 3% is high density, 40% is low density. That's where a future land use map is going to have to target those percentages and those proportions moving forward in the future. So don't want to get too much of a table here, but this is where I came up with If we have 26,915, that box in the lower left-hand corner, if we have around 27,000 units still available, if we divide that by 2,220, that's actually the last 5-year average of residential units. That says our capacity is good till about 2031. So if you remember the other graph, it said 2029, this says 2031. So when I say 10 to 12 years, this is kind of my rationale or my foundation for saying 10 to 12 years of plant capacity that's remaining. If you look at that line that I've kind of highlighted, the 3.5 units per acre, that means that we have around 8,800 acres available if we maintain roughly that 3.4, 3.5 single-family units per acre. And you say, okay, well, how much is that in our urban growth boundary is the next question I kind of ask myself. So again, magic, Jerry Lee, GIS, it's a beautiful thing. This would have taken weeks and months to do back 15, 20 years ago, and now you can get it done in 2 days. So we went and looked at all of the unimproved parcel acreage in the city's urban growth boundary, and so there's almost 46,000 acres. You can probably take out the 13,600, the upper right corner green box. You can probably take out those septic soils from that 46,000, because one of the strategies we're taking at the Water Resources Department is we have, adopted guidelines for step systems, which are decentralized systems, which are the drip fields, so that these residential developments do not feed back into our centralized system, but they use on-site soils to drip, and they're kind of a self-supportive. CUD's been doing it forever. CUD has several developments, Royal Glen and a lot of others, that are actually inside our urban growth boundary. We've just permitted one, or we're building one, and I think we've permitted 2 others that Water Resources would be maintaining this system. So this is the table that links the zoning classifications to the flux rates to the single-family unit equivalents. It's in the proposed draft resolution that you've seen. I think Adam just sent out another a new revision, a slightly very, very minor tweak revisions today or this afternoon. So this is kind of this is what links zoning to sewer allocation. Kind of the what would you call it? What was that? It's the decoder ring or the Rosetta Stone. That's what I was trying to think. So the high points, I'm not going to go into a whole lot. I'm just going to use this one slide. I hate to just read slides, but this is kind of important. So a process will exist to petition the city for additional allowances above the table, the flux rates I just showed you. At the time of an application for the will serve, there's still a process when someone comes in and asks for sewer for their site to be served by sewer. We will ask for a 10% fee for the overall sewer connections, and that will give them vested rights to sewer for a period of 30 months. They will be able to do that 3 more times, again, putting in, if they don't do anything or turn any dirt or do any project, they will have the opportunity for 3 more 30-month periods, so 10 years effectively, and they would pay in the 40% of connection fees. If they do something and they move forward with the project, then all that will be credited to their sewer connection fees. If they don't do anything and they've just effectively sat on a piece of property for 10 years, we would not return that fee, that vesting fee, and we would move on to a different development opportunity, or basically take that allocation away and reallocate it to some other development. So the vested rights aren't transferable. They stay with the property. I just said this earlier. They'll all be credited to the total fees, and they're not refundable in the event the project is not constructed. So the big question is, what about a transition or grandfathering in if, for example, the project you just talked about, or some other projects that are fairly deep into the process and some time and money and effort's been expended. These are staff's recommendations that if you have a will-serve letter that's 365 days before the effective date of the resolution, you're good. If you've done a flow study, we do have situations where we will find if there are bottlenecks in the system. We will contract with developers to say we need to go through a wet season. We need to determine if this particular pipe is big enough to allow the density that you have. So this is something that a lot of folks don't see, but we do kind of a de facto allocation in a lot of areas, and I keep bringing up the John Bragg Highway, Rutherford Boulevard area, that there's around 600 acres out there that we knew we had a recurring overflow problem downstream of that area, and that we could not support any development on that sewer system without exacerbating that overflow, which gets us into a violation of our permit, in which the state says you're in a moratorium, you have to, you're in a consent decree, or you have to stop allowing connections altogether. So we have had to, in several instances, limit density or tell folks we just had a pump station that was too small, or a line size that was too small, based on just the situation or the geographic area that they were in. There's a little bit of a side there. So projects whose site plan receives planning commission or administrative approval within 90 days of the effective date of the resolution, and project who received preliminary plat from approval from planning commission or administrative approval within 90 days of the resolution. And 5 is projects subject to current bulk zoning. So I did work with Matthew and Sam on these. So I have to admit, I'm not sure exactly what some of these mean. But current bulk zoning requirements provide the site plan or preliminary plat for such project receives planning commission or administrative approval within 90 days of the resolution's effective date. An applicant may request a higher sewer allocation per the proposed ordinance prior to or simultaneous with the submittal of a site plan or preliminary plat. Plan development projects whose development plan has been approved by the Planning Commission and City Council prior to the effective date. And I think this last development was just discussed. Plan development projects for which a current rezoning application has been received by the city and whose approval by the Planning Commission and or City Council is pending as of the effective date of the resolution. So those again are, I'm sorry to read through those, but those are of very much interest, and probably what I get most questions on currently on the dozens of phone calls I receive on this particular allocation ordinance on, can I get in or can I not get in? And so we're trying to be fair here. That's the bottom line, and just not necessarily say, once the allocation ordinance is in place, sorry, don't care how far you are in your process, you're out. So this is the scenario we want to avoid, and I know this is, I said it to someone today, I understand. I know you don't like what I'm telling you. I know that you don't, but I hope you appreciate it, because this is what we want to avoid. I use Shelton Square as kind of the example, but if you have a 742 single-family unit that we've given you a will serve letter, if you have an 8-year build-out expectation, in year 4, our WRF reaches a maximum permitted capacity, so 50% of this subdivision is not allowed to tie to the sanitary sewer. We're built out. Our plant is at capacity, and I can't allow any more connections, or I start violating my NPDES permit. So we are trying to avoid this. We're talking about now a 10 to 12 year build out. So we have to start accounting as we approve lots and as we prove connections. I have to start taking that 26,900 number and start deducting and subtracting units from that and saying, okay, when do we hit kind of the ceiling? This is kind of a different equation than the density issue. Remember, the density deals with our collection system, but I do have to start looking at the overall bucket of units and start an accounting process of that, so that we don't overcommit and that we run into a scenario where several years down the road we have to tell somebody, I know you've got your infrastructure in the ground, I know you've got your roads built, I know you've spent a lot of money, but, oh, sorry, we just didn't, we know our eyes weren't on the ball, and we had to, we got to stop you midstream instead of giving you the proactive heads up. So the next steps, well, I'm in step 1 here tonight. Present to the City Council November 14th or 21st. That may be first reading. Second reading, I'm not sure, maybe the 21st or maybe December 5th. Again, I have to go through and look at the city and determine the current committed inventory that we have. So we know of that 26,900, there's a lot of lots that have been approved already. So that 26,900 number is a real number that we have to see how many lots we've already, or single connections we've already committed to, and then start the accounting process. And in speaking with Mr. Martin, annually look at this, and maybe when we first start it, we may need to go every 6 months and start reporting back to everybody and letting everybody know where we are. So that's it. That's as quick as I can kind of go through a pretty complicated presentation of that nature, but I'm open for questions and discussion, and hopefully I can answer you.
So I have a couple of questions, if you
Yes,
don't
sir.
mind. I'm just trying to get my head or hands around this. So these did a very good job explaining it, not only tonight, but at the meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago.
Thank you.
My understanding, so in the meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago, there was specific upgrades that you were talking about, whether it be overall creek pump station, I think there was one other for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So those are coming to fruition, meaning those have been voted by the Water Resources Board and have been approved. Is that a correct statement?
They're on our 5-year CIP, and I publish I do a dashboard every month on our board agenda, and I give them a 5-year, if I add a project, if I update estimates, I give them a 5-year window of projects that we see either being funded from debt, being funded from our cash reserves, or being funded from the rates that we receive every year. So to qualify what I'm about to say, they know about it and the money's accounted for. It's not been officially approved, but it is on our 5-year planning horizon, and I would not expect them to not approve it, if I can say it that way.
All right, so thank you. So my follow-up question to that is, these numbers, these assumptions that you have made, these capacity assumptions that are made as part of this plan, okay, are there any other, as part of the 10 to 12 year span that we are looking at this capacity, built into this plan, are there capital improvements that have been what's going to need to be done to the water treatment plant to actually expand the capacity, or we are dealing with what we know today and not necessarily any capital improvements associated with the expansion of the water treatment plant? You
Right.
follow my question?
I do, and I wish I had a new slide, man. I need just a slide deck that I can just pick from, because we have done our water resource integration plan, we springboarded off the 2035 plan. I said, folks, if we've got a foundational plan for 2035 that's population projections and areas of anticipated growth, we need to have a companion document. It's a 25-year look into the future on how are we going to support that with water resources, stormwater, wastewater, reuse water, drinking water. And so we do have that strategic plan. Now, what we're updating right now is our 201 facilities plan. So let's talk, the water resource integration plan is strategic. We're moving into the tactical now. So the 201 facilities plan is, what do we need to improve over that 20-year horizon to support the growth? And then again, dialing it down even more, I take it down to that 5-year CIP. So we haven't factored, because I look at a 5-year rate design, because I don't like to spring rates on people, like 1 year have a major bump. So I take that 5-year CIP and I use that to develop our rate design. So I don't have, I just know these numbers because I gave them to Adam this morning. We spent roughly $42 million altogether to upgrade the plant, 8 million gallons. I don't have $42 million in the 5-year CIP. That will come eventually. I'm having lunch with the head engineer for the Water Pollution Control Division at TDEC at the end of this month. I'm going to meet the division director in December to give them our waste load allocation model that we just finished that says, hey, we can put more effluent into the West Fork Stones River than previously determined. So we're working very hard. I'm working very hard on those 10 and 15-year solutions on a permitting front, and the money will be factored in over time. That's a long-winded way to answer it, but we don't have it in our 5-year plan, but it will ultimately be in there.
Okay. Last question for me. So what is the either approval process or thought process associated with developers that say, you know what, I want to do something different than what this plan design outlines as to the density piece, but I'm willing to provide the land that would allow us to do this if we did a step system. So is that an alternative to the density piece if they have the soil, the right parameters to meet the requirements associated with that step system?
Right. So I've been broached about that as a potential future solution. And so it gets back to, I would say, if you've got the soil on your site, then use the on-site soil and do an on-site system as the conventional step system allows. But I think somebody said, oh, no, what if we have property over here that we can provide you for a drip system or a soil dispersion system, and we can get the density over here? Yeah. And and quite honestly, I don't know if that's not a bad, if somebody is willing to give 20 acres of good soils or 10 acres or whatever that's off of their development site so they can increase the density on that site, but they're affording a provision to dispose of that effluent on a drip system. I'm not opposed to that. I think that's something that's, again, it's
not a provision for that at this point in time.
Well, it would have to, I will say this, 10 years ago, there was no way we were going to get in the step system business, and now we're in it. So I think, just to be, and I said this a little bit at the stakeholder meeting, reinvention is taking control of change.
Sure.
Right? So we want to be reinventors. So we don't want to just say, with the challenges we have to be open to everything. So I'm not closed off to any future solution. I think being innovative and reinventing ourselves continuously is an outstanding, we want to be known for that. So I'm open. I'm open to all solutions.
I would hope that we would at least entertain it.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll jump in, make some comments too. I asked Darren in the ordinance, I think the way it was written was asked, and basically it mentioned us coming before council every 2 years to review this and ask that we shorten that to 1 year for part of the reason that you're talking about. And I know you're constantly making efforts to try to see what other options are available. That way we can constantly be as innovative as we can to try to make sure that if we can help keep that capacity.
Right.
And use the capacity in a way that does not put future development at risk and future growth opportunities at risk, then that's a good thing that we talk about it more often and not less often as we start putting in restrictions. And I guess the other comments I would make, I'll just relate to planning. We talk a lot about about density, and it's certainly appropriate to do so. But one of the things that I want to make sure we also talk about on the record is, you know, your calculations went through different uses and different percentage and different allocations of that use. And so we've got a 3.39 number that we're kind of staring at. But what's really important about that is it doesn't mean that every development that comes past us needs to be at 3.39, because we've got specific allocations for low density, medium density, high density. They're going to be above some of those numbers,
Right.
because it's an average across parks, mixed use, everything. And
Correct.
so I think that's important to just say, so that we know that we're not trying to hit 3.39 on everything that we do.
Right.
It has to be an average. So anyway, just a general comment too. But part of this is, you know, Darren's mentioned it, the discharge, and you've done a great job explaining it, articulating it, and proofing that to the community, so I appreciate that. But the other piece is we do have some capacity issues related to density on what can be pushed through a pipe.
Right.
So that's a real thing, and we've talked about it, and we need to act not only appropriately but responsibly as we're doing that. So I thank you for that, because I think it's a big deal that we're talking about this now and not talking about it 2 years away or 3 years away. But the other piece that I'm proud of, and everything can always be better, but from what we've done today, you know, we've made a lot of progress on what the grandfathering phase looks like from where we started, from the point of what we were discussing. And I think it's hard to talk about economic development and all those sorts of things and not give some credit to those people who have invested in our community for a long period of time, who have developed a lot of infrastructure that they've donated to the city of Murfreesboro, that has allowed us to grow from a rooftop standpoint, that has created commercial opportunities, that has created economic development opportunities, because there were people here to serve. And so I think shortening that window of review to 1 year and making sure that we've included some provisions for people who have will serve letters currently, who have site plans approved currently, shows that we're not only looking for new people to bring in that are good for the economy, but we're trying to be also sensitive to those people who've made significant investments and have gotten us where we are.
And I would, I didn't really hit it on the table, but we have looked at the city core overlay, gateway design overlay, and the central business district as a no limit, because there is we do want to incentivize density in certain areas. You know, that's again kind of, and I think not to put words in the mouth of some of the councilmen I've talked to, but to have those high density areas on the periphery of your city limits, that does put a burden more on your rolling stock services to get out there, police, fire, public safety, schools, and try to incentivize that density to come back into more of a centralized area is kind of a that's kind of a something we're trying to incentivize.
You just took Eddie's thunder.
Some of it. Darren, if there's one thing I hear every single day, it's stop the growth. Eddie, stop the growth. And I get what they're saying, because our schools are crowded, our roads are ridiculous now. Anybody that thinks we don't have huge traffic problems just needs to go out and drive a little bit. I mean, and I've tried to defend it in the past, saying, well, it's not as bad as Nashville. Well, it's just about as bad as Nashville. I mean, our traffic's getting to be horrible. And if we're listening to these people, I think, you know, we're targeting 3.4, 3.5 is our target. And if we're going to start annexing properties into the city and giving them greater density than what that 3.4 or 3.5 is, I would say if we're going to annex somebody on the outskirts where it's harder to provide services, it should absolutely be as low a density as you can possibly get it, because it makes more sense to save those sewage taps, because when job opportunities come to Murfreesboro, the last thing you want us to do is say, well, we've got a whole lot of high-density housing out here, but we can't let you bring your business to Murfreesboro because we can't give you sewage service. I mean, that's my concern, is what's going to happen down the road. And I'm probably worrying way beyond my window of opportunity to have any influence on it one way or the other. But the one thing that I'm concerned about, at least for this point, is that if we're annexing property and bringing it into the city, that I just don't think, and this is me, and you've heard from me about this, but I don't think it should come in with high density, because that's not going to be advantageous to the city, because high density is going to have high traffic, it's going to have high use of services, it's going to have a high demand on your parks, it's going to have, you know, it's not good for the city of Murfreesboro, and that's ultimately my concern. If we continue to do this, we just as well take the moratorium off apartments and say build anything you want, because basically that's what you're doing if you're permitting high density housing to be built. And so I just, you know, I'm trying to listen to the people that are telling me what they want, and I'm trying to pass the message along, and I think, you know, I know that planning commissioners don't get calls like councilmen get. They just don't get them. Because
That's why we're planning commission.
yeah, but you know, when you get calls every single day saying there's a problem here, there's a problem here, there's a problem here, you can't write it off and say there's not a problem there. There is. When the public's telling us that we've got a huge problem, and everything's going to have capacity, and I know your concern is sewage and water capacities, but traffic has a capacity, schools have capacities, police service has capacities, fire service has capacities. Everything that the city does has a capacity, and if we can get beyond this sewer issue, which I hope we do pretty soon, because we've learned more about sewer than I ever wanted to know about sewer. But if we ever get beyond that, there will be a next capacity issue.
There'll be another constraint,
right.
Correct. Yep.
And that's part of the constraints of growth. But to just frivolously continue to say, it's okay to go over that number, it's okay to go over that number, I just think is a dangerous road to go down. And that's my point, so.
And again, I don't, you know, the companion document to this ordinance has to be a future land use map that they're tethered together. That when you make decisions to give more density beyond the proportions that are assumed in here, that you understand that there's the consequence that if you giveth, you got to taketh away, or you know that you're going to leave some property out there that won't ever be allowed to tie into sewer at all. I mean, so the first come, first serve philosophy is what we've been operating under for, you know, since the time, I guess, Murfreesboro's had sewer. And all this is trying to do is more equitably and proportionately distribute the sewer so that we don't have these pockets of basically, sorry, you're just going to effectively be a green field forever, because the capacity downstream can't handle anything. So that's the ultimate consequence, is you just have pockets of like the acreage out on the east side of town that you just kind of go, we can't handle any sewer here. And you're going, and you know, and they're doing a decentralized step system. They've figured out how to make that development work financially using a decentralized system. And so we just want to plan. You know, we just want to try to proactively get into position.
To your point, and I agree with everything you're saying, but to your point, an expanded plant, I was told, would be well over $100 million. And that is going to be $100 million. Anything that we go out there and we have to relay lines because we've got an 8-inch line, and in order for the pump station to work at capacity, it's going to have a 12-inch line or whatever line you put out there. All those things come at significant cost, and that cost has to be passed on to the ratepayer.
Right.
So you're looking at increasing the cost of living in the city with every one of these things that you're doing that you say goes beyond what our capacity is.
Right.
So I just, you know.
I always say there's a sustainability, affordability scale, right? Yeah. You can get a very, 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 I mean, we can take this water and make it drinkable. That's going to be a real high water sewer bill if we take it to that level of purity. So, message received.
So I do have some questions.
Okay, sure.
So I'm in the practical, all right? So from a practical standpoint, how are we going to do this between the planning department, the water and sewer department, and the planning commission? Because what you've told us is we can go out and approve a development that's above that limit, but we also have to consider, if we do that, that we're limiting the rest of the rest of the land. So how are we going to practically know that when we're coming to vote on something?
That's the future land use map has got to come in short order. So there is a proposal on the table that is being formulated now. I think it'll be probably coming to the council at their workshop next Wednesday, possibly. Not sure. That's Mr. Whitaker is dealing on that front. So it would be something that would look at, it would be a future land use map that would take into account the proportion and the densities that we've put into that table and root it in a level of reality, saying, hey, if we know we're giving around 2,500 residential permits per year, I'm going to do round math here, and we're going to target 3.5 units per acre. So what's the 2,500 divided by 3.5?
So I'm with you there.
You with me there? Okay.
I'm more thinking of when the document comes to us, I'm assuming we're going to need additional information, because if the document comes to us and we approve it, then there needs to be some tracking of that.
Yes.
That the next time it comes before us,
Right.
that you already considered that we've already used up capacity.
Yes, that's where I'm working with Gerald Lee, and we're looking at a GIS tool so that as these things are approved, we are documenting them. Am I getting somebody to, sorry, I'm getting nods from Sam behind me. Somebody is accounting for this in our GIS, so that's where, I mean, if we need to come out here and roll out with monthly reports or quarterly reports to begin with, on how we're tracking this, and to give you that visual of, yes, we're on top of it, so that it gives you that level of confidence.
Well, it's not that. I
Absolutely do
mean,
that.
I'm just looking at I want to know, should I assume that Matt and the team has worked with you, and that when it
Yes.
comes before us,
Correct.
that we already know that, hey, water and sewer has calculated if we approve it,
Right.
we're good.
Yes, yes, you can trust that coordination has happened.
Mr. Russell, I think one of the things that we have been making an effort on is working with Darren and his crew. Ms. Smith, his assistant, has been attending probably 75% of our meetings, the ones that she's determined that she needs to be at, and making developers aware of the allocation ordinance and its impacts on their proposed project. So as Mr. Gore mentioned, the coordination is occurring, and it has been for several months since this was originally proposed.
And will we make missteps? Probably. Will we eliminate those as much as possible? Yes. But we're moving into a new paradigm in regards to the coordination and level of effort that we've not done before. So it's going to be a new process for sure.
Yeah, because take the project we just looked at, right? If we approve the higher density, does that impact a future project that's going to be right next to it that we can't get some commercial project in? Or some other development that's really, really good at the time? It's really, really good. It's going to be good for the community. We have to consider that now when we're approving projects. That's a lot more than what we've been doing in the past.
Right. It's going to be looking at, again, Gateway 2.0.
Yeah. That
particular development is the timing of that. Which comes first, chicken egg kind of situation. I understand the challenges, and that's where I hope, again, and I hope I'm not putting too much stock in this future land use map, but that's where I think you have to identify the priority areas that you do want to see a certain future land use in a certain area, and then really that's published, and that's where you want to see it go. That's your priority areas.
And that document will be used not only by staff to guide applicants, but also that'll be a tool that the Planning Commission will have at its disposal that Planning Commission will have at its disposal, that it has reviewed and approved and knows where it is earmarking areas for potential higher densities and higher intensity uses that would have a bigger impact. So it's kind of crafting that future land use map in light of what is proposed with the sewer allocation ordinance.
Mr. Gore, as you know, we've learned a lot, and we certainly appreciate all the time and effort you and all of your department have put into it. The stakeholder meeting was the first time I learned anything at all about any of this. I guess I'm embarrassed to say that I never even heard of a will serve letter until maybe at the stakeholder meeting or whatever.
Right.
Maybe I should have known what that was before. I guess I never had any reason to need to know what that was. I hadn't heard of that. So just to let you know how much I have to learn here, because again, kind of like you've alluded to tonight, from a planning commission standpoint, prior to this point, really, when we got an annexation and feasibility study, and you flip through that and it says, what does water and sewer say, and what does the school system say, and what does the electric department say, and I'm just checking off all the boxes as we go down through there. Everybody said it's all okay. That's really as far as we ever looked at it. I didn't look at anything beyond that. So pleased to learn what's going on and be, realize that there's a lot more we need to do on it from our end, and appreciate the help y'all are giving us to get there.
Appreciate your help.
And just make sure we have the tools we need to be able to do the job we need to do for you. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
what are we voting on this tonight to recommend it to City Council, or?
Yes, ma'am. It would be a vote of a recommendation on the draft ordinance to City Council. Mr. Tucker.
Mr. Tucker.
Yeah, I just, thank you, Ms. Jones. Just wanted to make one clarification. This afternoon, we submitted revisions to the ordinance and the resolution that are slightly different than what was published with the agenda. And you're welcome to approve either version, whichever you feel comfortable. But if you feel, having looked at the revisions that were provided this afternoon, feel comfortable with moving forward and recommending that one, I wanted to at least provide members of the Planning Commission to ask any questions they had about the revisions before you voted on it, and so that those questions could be addressed publicly as well. Regardless of what you feel comfortable recommending, I think we would probably move forward if you recommend the ordinance with the proposed revisions and make those recommendations to City Council when we present it. So.
Mr. Tucker, will we make separate motions for the ordinance and resolution, or all in one?
Yes.
If there are no other questions, I'm happy to make a motion.
Did anybody have any questions about the revisions that we received? If you had time to review those, or?
I reviewed them, they're fine.
Yeah. Mr. Martin?
I'm willing to make a recommendation that we approve the draft ordinance, and I would insert that we change section 33-75B from biannual to annual with a review.
What section again?
It's 33-75, and it's letter B, related to the review of the
So we're making a motion on the revised set that we received this afternoon, and then you're adding the one additional change.
Yes, ma'am.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that's the draft. So on the resolution. All right, draft ordinance we got, now the draft resolution.
Move we approve the resolution as presented with the revisions.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank y'all very much. Appreciate you being here. Thank you. And do we have any other business tonight?
Ms. Jones, other than thanking all of our multiple lawyers who are here tonight,
I know it.
I think
Once again.
we are the most well-represented planning commission in the state of Tennessee
I
tonight.
don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. That we need to have so many lawyers here. But thank y'all all for being here.
The only other thing that I would have is just to reiterate that the year is rapidly coming to a close, and we have our state mandated continuing education. Ms. Garland, Mr. Halliburton, Mr. Smotherman, I promise that I won't bring you to City Hall for another postponed webinar next time. When I announce that we have one, we will actually have one. But we do need to make sure that everybody gets their 4 hours by December 31st, and we have a number of webinars coming up before the end of the year that hopefully you'll have ample opportunity to get there.
Okay, I will.
We'll get
Thank
it
you, Mr.
done,
Russell.
right? Any other business? Okay. And we stand adjourned. Thank you all.
Mr. Barnes.